Hello, this is Annie Dieu-Le-Veut, Shaman of Avalon, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how I heal magically and alchemically through my spiritual relationship with the sun. It always amuses me when scientists talk about cosmic coincidences. I suppose it's the only way they can explain away the supreme intelligence that operates everything, from the orbiting orbs of our solar system to the orbiting orbs of the atom. But didn't someone once say that coincidences are God's way of staying anonymous? Well, in the case of the sun, I think he's rather overdone it, to the point that he's in danger of showing his hand. Or maybe he wants to be discovered. But there are so many of those cosmic coincidences with this glorious star, so many that without them our planet Earth would not exist, and neither would the whole solar system, not to mention all of us. The Earth itself was formed from an explosion of material from the golden star of the sun more than 4 billion years ago, as were all the other planets of this solar system. As Joni Mitchell once sang, "We are stardust, we are golden, and we have to get back to the garden." Well, actually we are already here in the garden, and I'm now going to explain why. The Earth is on average 93 million miles away from the sun. And if the Earth was just 1 million miles closer to the sun, the seas would boil, we would all burn up to ash, and the whole planet would turn into a dusty, arid desert, something like Mars. Conversely, if the Earth was just 1 million miles further away from the sun, we would freeze under a permanent ice age. So, is it really just a happy coincidence that at around 93 million miles we've found the sweet spot, this green and pleasant land, this Garden of Eden? Is it really just a random collision of possibilities that happen to be beneficial to life in a universe of infinite possibilities? Well, you can believe that if you like, but I must say I find it rather odd that for all their advanced space telescopes and other equipment, they have yet to find such a happy set of synchronicities anywhere else in this universe or in any other universe. So today in this video, I'm going to help you get in contact with and benefit from a magical or shamanic relationship with the sun. In getting familiar with the character of the sun, you will know what to ask him when his advice centre, as we call it, opens at dawn on a Sunday, which is his day. I say him because where the moon is female, the sun is the personification of the male principle, and together the sun and the moon create the alchemical marriage. But really, to know the essential character of the sun, you only have to look at how children depict him in their paintings, as a big yellow ball coming up over the horizon with a huge, cheery, generous grin on his face. That's because, unlike us, most children haven't yet forgotten what they know. So let's go back in time to when we knew who the sun was. If you were in Britain in March 2020, right at the beginning of the first lockdown, you would have noticed an interesting phenomenon. Summer came early that year, very early. The sun came out on March 21st, the spring equinox, and then it just shone hotter and hotter every day. It was virtually a heat wave for the next 2 months at least. Many of us knew that viruses normally cannot harm people with healthy immune systems, so we were delighted One of the best things for a strong immune system is vitamin D, and the best source of vitamin D is the sun. And so we were out in our gardens lapping it up. I remember at that time feeling overwhelmed with gratitude that in the midst of all the fear stalking the land, the cheery sun had not let us down. He had turned up to support us in our hour of need. Now, you may think that's a kind of strange view of the sun, that he had the intelligence to know and turn up when we needed him the most. You might see it as a childlike, naive view. But in fact, it is an understanding that has grown in me ever since I started practicing shamanism more than 20 years ago now. And if we go back for thousands of years when our ancestors lived in tribes led by shamans, then we find that they understood the sun to be a large, complex system with a consciousness and a form of self-governing intelligence. Through their shamanic and alchemical knowledge, they perceived this huge fiery ball in the sky as a living being, entirely aware of himself and his place at the centre of a solar system of planets, none of which could exist without his radiant presence, and that includes all of us. The alchemists of old found that the sun governs every aspect of the 7-step process to create the philosopher's stone via his alchemical marriage with the moon, and it is this marriage that creates all the fertility for all growth, whether on this planet or any other. The sun is the male to his female consort, the moon. He is the fire to her water. He is the heat to her cold. He is the yang to her yin. And for our purposes here, it is the marriage of spirit and soul. It is full enlightenment. So is it really a coincidence that we humans are the only beings in the universe who can witness the miracle of this marriage in the heavens, which we call a solar eclipse? From our perspective here on Earth, it looks as if the moon is covering the sun. That's because the sun is 400 times greater in width than the moon, and she is 400 times further away from the sun. But even more thrillingly, just before that moment of full conjunction, when the two lovers turn the lights out, the perfect symbol of an engagement to marry appears. A diamond ring is seen briefly flashing against the black canvas of the night sky. But that's just another coincidence, I'm sure. So you'd be forgiving for thinking that a solar eclipse is a planetarian show put on solely for our benefit, and that the meaning and purpose of human existence is a story told in a child's picture book. Well, please hold on to that thought, because it is the only imagery the subconscious mind understands, and it becomes quite traumatized when it is separated from it, and that disease causes disease in the body. If you were to go for a tarot reading when you're feeling this way, when you've lost touch with the playfulness of your inner child, you're likely to get the sun card, but reversed, with the child riding the horse upside down. The metal that alchemists associated with the sun was gold. Gold chloride changes its characteristics during eclipses, and also when the earth is closest to the sun, on the summer solstice. So those mages of old knew what they were talking about. But their magical and spiritual relationship with the sun was forced to change when the Christian religion demonized all such shamanic beliefs, not through any scientific evidence, but through a kind of Roman-style woke-type bullying, which they based on a misunderstanding of the alchemical symbols buried in the original gospel story of Jesus Christ. Those stories of the Gnostics were discovered in 1945 in a place called Nag Hammadi in Egypt, in a desert cave where they'd been hidden from the Roman censors. Nowadays you can access the Nag Hammadi Gospels online, and in those you will discover that Jesus was just another in a long line of mythological heroes who trod the rim of the constellations in an alchemical journey, guided by his father, the sun. To alchemists, Jesus Christ was the child of the philosopher, which was another term they used for the philosopher's stone that turns all it touches into gold. This is because the child of the philosopher was the offspring of the nuptial bed of the marriage of the sun and the moon. It is the child of the philosopher that you see on the sun tarot card, at least on the Rider-Waite version, riding the white horse of sovereignty, But the priests of the new religion told those who knew nothing of alchemy that God had sent his only son to earth to save us, and in return we had killed him, and that only by paying tithes to the temple over a long lifetime might we be able to redeem such a heinous sin. For the rich, there was a special class of tithes called Indulgences. Indulgences were supposed to get you a front row seat next to God at the second coming. But there was a problem with that second coming. It never came. It never came because in reality there had never been a first coming. The sun had always been with us, and so had his marriage with the moon that produced the child of the philosopher. So those indulgences just went on feeding the indulgences of an increasingly indolent priesthood. Over time, those tithes turned into taxes, and more recently, we've been given another theology by the descendants of that same priesthood. The new original sin means that we have to pay off causing a climate emergency. But once again, it is the magnificent sun that commands the flow of the ever-changing climate on Earth through its huge dark magnetic fields that we call sunspots. When there are lots of those dark magnetic sunspots visible on the surface of the sun, the climate on Earth gets very warm, such as in medieval times when the monks were able to grow vines for wine in the far north of Britain. But when there are few sunspots visible, the climate gets colder, such as when the Thames froze over in the 17th century. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to turn into a talk about man-made climate change, but it isn't until you realise the extent of the ignorance about the nature of the sun that you can even begin to consider another perspective, and one that would do us all much more good. So I hope you can see how everything always comes back to the sun in the end, and that is because without the sun, there is nothing, absolutely nothing. But now you may be thinking, how on earth could I have a relationship with such a majestically supreme and all-powerful God? Well, he does want you to have one with him. In fact, it might have been why you've been given a place in his beautiful, so perfectly positioned Garden of Eden. I know this is not sound according to modern science, far from it. But then the Italian astronomer Galileo, who was persecuted by the Inquisition in the 17th century for his heresy in discovering that the Earth orbited the Sun and not the other way round, was only finally exonerated by the Vatican about 50 years ago. The Inquisition is slow to forgive heresy, glacially slow, and especially when the heresy turns out to be right. So, seeing as today's Inquisition has yet to come up with the meaning and purpose of human life, I think I'm entitled to at least suggest one. One, anyway, that has been making more and more sense to the picture book enjoyed by my subconscious mind ever since I began to practice shamanism more than 20 years ago. One that is in line with what I experience at sunrise on a Sunday, when I call on the sun shamanically to meet with me for healing and for guidance. And one that is in tune with the dawn chorus, both from the birds singing their hearts out below to build great sonar cathedrals of light, and the chorus of cheeps and loon-like warbling above that comes as if in reply from electromagnetic radio waves rising alongside the sun on the horizon, like the riders of the dawn. Those entwined bands of electromagnetic waves are a form of the alchemical marriage in themselves, when the god El makes love with the female Magdalene. And so, in short, scientists will never find God at the bottom of a test tube, no matter how many atoms they smash up in long tunnels, like drunk hooligans in a subway on a Saturday night. It is an inner subjective quest, not an outer objective one. It is the path of the poet, the artist, the dreamer, the dancer, the musician. It is the long and winding road less travelled to the inner sun. There is another sacred marriage that we are able to watch from Earth. If we go far north enough, we might be lucky enough to catch a glimpse of the long swaying robes of the Earth Goddess, changing through all the hues of the Peacock's Tale as she enters the bridal chamber. The Peacock's Tale is another stage of the alchemical marriage that comes just before the birth of the child, of the philosopher. This alchemical marriage between the earth and the sun comes about as a result of the particles of the atmosphere of Earth pulling and attracting and exciting the particles of the solar winds. And this gives us the gloriously beautiful aurora borealis, or northern lights. I remember once travelling up into the Arctic Circle, and wherever I stayed I'd bump into young Japanese honeymooning couples. I discovered that they believe that making love under the northern lights makes them more likely to conceive a child. I don't know whether anyone has studied that effect scientifically, but I think it's a very romantic idea, if a little on the chilly side. The Indian yogis, of course, have long practiced the 12-step salutations to the sun ritual, or Surya Namaskar, which is performed ideally at dawn. I once practiced it every morning on the beach at an ashram in the Bahamas. It felt absolutely wonderful, as if I was opening each tiny cell of my body to allow the sun to flood into them with its great healing warmth. But the most powerful shamanic technique I ever used with the sun was given to me by a guru. I was told it was a secret technique that so connected a person to the sun that they glowed golden with it forevermore. It was a mantra that I had to repeat 108 times, twice in a day, ideally at sunrise and sunset, but at least morning and afternoon. I had no feeling one way or the other about glowing golden, but I was intrigued to do it because I was just starting out in my shamanic practice, and I was becoming increasingly aware of the character of the sun. It was starting to feel quite personal, and I wanted to know him better, to have his blessings and protection. At the time, I was working as a copywriter in an advertising agency in London, where I was bored out of my mind. So this practice gave a purpose to my otherwise seemingly meaningless day. Every lunchtime, I'd go out to Soho Square. There, at the centre of neatly manicured lawns lined with flower beds, was a pagoda styled as a mock Tudor timber-framed house. Actually, I have just checked online and it is still there today. So anyway, I'd sit in that little house and I'd look towards the sun, or at least in the direction where I knew the sun should be, behind the clouds, and I'd practice the mantra I'd been given. I managed to keep it up for the whole 40 days, and I don't know if it made me glow golden. Nobody mentioned it anyway, but I do know it changed irrevocably my relationship with the sun. The sun is also the governing sign of Leo, and so as a Leo myself, I was able to get in touch much more deeply with those aspects of my personality, some of which had got bent out of shape quite considerably over time, or even buried completely. Previously, I'd been a bit embarrassed about being a Leo. It was a very uncool sign to have been born under when you were going through the 60s. You were seen as opinionated, egotistical and bossy, and always disrupting the peace. I thought they were probably right about that. I can remember sitting in circles of dope smokers and quickly getting bored and agitated as everyone else chilled out and then descended into zoning out completely and just sitting there staring at their feet. I didn't want that kind of peace. And as it turns out now, when I look back, I realise that I knew even then in my gut that I was never going to get any peace until I could discover why I was here on planet Earth, and I intended to be a bossy busybody until I found that. Anyway, once I came under the benevolent guardianship of the governor of my zodiac sign, I discovered there's a lot more to being a Leo, and some of it is quite useful. I no longer shy away from disturbing the peace when I can see it is not really peace at all, but something more like appeasement to bullies. I've been able to find and display the courage of the Leo lion when I've needed to, such as at times like these when the woke Inquisition can attack you for having the wrong fringe views. I've always had the sun's warmth, but now I'm not afraid to radiate it. He gives me my optimism, which has served me very well indeed over the past 2 difficult years. And I realise that I can be generous and exude my natural feelings of benevolence without worrying about stuff running out, because it never will. And speaking of abundance, if you're practicing the law of attraction, well, the sun is the most magnetic being in the whole solar system. He is our great attractor in this part of the universe. And so you would really benefit from drawing some of that magnetism into your solar plexus, the seat of your power. It's just a very simple exercise. When you're sunbathing, call the sun's rays into your solar plexus and just imagine them going in there. It's as easy as that. So anyway, I could go on and on about the sun, but his qualities and characteristics are legion, and so we'd be here forever. And really, my purpose here was just to give you a taster from my own shamanic experience, in the hope that it will encourage you to get to know him yourself. Your story with the sun won't be my story, but there is a story to be had, and there will be twists and turns and adventures and trials and funny moments and sad moments, as there are in all good stories. But as you both ride off into the sunset together, I hope you live happily ever after. You've been listening to me, Annie Dieu-Le-Veut. All my books are on Amazon, and if you'd like to support my work, I'm on Patreon as Shaman of Avalon.